Bueno, señor presidente, Mr. President, es un honor especial para mí, para nosotros, estar con usted hoy. Para mí es un honor personal, institucional y de todo. The Venezuelan American Association, along with our partners, the Colombian American Association, the Venezuelan American Endowment for the Arts, are pleased to recognize what you have accomplished in granting protected legal status to some 2 million Venezuelan migrants. The Venezuelan American Freedom and Friendship Award, here it is right here, adds our voice to those many who see this temporary protected status program as an example for the entire world. And I wish the world would pay more attention to this example, frankly. We have noted previously a parallel to what Winston Churchill said of President Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program. He said it was one of the least sordid acts in history. Now, I would apply the same sentiment to what you have done with Venezuelan refugees. But an important point to recognize is that both Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill knew full well that it wasn't just a gift to the UK, that it was an important measure to be taken for the defense of the national interests of the United States, and so it proved to be. And I think the same thing is going to be proven true in Colombia. Temporary protected status, of course, is a humanitarian effort on the part of so many Venezuelan refugees, but it is also going to redound to the benefit, the clear economic, social, and legal benefits of Colombia. This registry program, which I understand has already reached 1.3 million, I heard you say that the other day, including biometric recognition, allows those people to be able to search for a job, to have health care and other services. We are confident that hardworking Venezuelans will do their utmost to rise to the challenge and to contribute to the nation that has given them sanctuary. Mr. President, you have noted that Colombia and Venezuela have a long history of brotherhood. You have proven that once again. We also want to do everything possible to publicize what is happening and what you are doing. Mr. President, you repeatedly have pointed out how underfunded the Venezuelan crisis is, the alarming disparity between amount of aid the international community gives to the Syrians, for example, and gives per capita to Venezuelan refugees. Aid to each Syrian refugee is calculated at $3,150 each. Each Venezuelan so far has only been allocated $265 per person. That's 1/12 of what the world, what the international agencies, what governments are giving to the Syrians. The international community should be listening and acting, and I hope that ceremonies like this and others, the King of Spain, will add to the publicity so that people will know, governments will know, that this is a humanitarian crisis unprecedented in Latin American history that requires the world to do something about it, and the world is not doing enough by a whole lot. Let me add that we at VAUS also support your administration's firm policy of defending democracy, human rights, and legitimate commerce against threats from any source, whether the Venezuelan dictatorship, criminal gangs, or narco-terrorists. We at VAUS admire your courage and steadfastness. Let me thank some very special people responsible for all of this. Stephanie Junger-Molt, President of the Board of the Colombian American Association, Ali Cordero, Chairman and Founder of the Venezuelan American Endowment for the Arts, Rafael Barrios, not here, distinguished Venezuelan sculptor and the creator of the actual award. His Excellency Guillermo Fernandez de Soto, permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations, and un amigo mío del siglo pasado. Parece casi 100 años, ¿no? Carlos Iván Lopez, Vice President of House, Stuart Fleischman, partner, Sherman and Sterling for hosting this event, Juan Jose Reverol, member of the Board of Advisors of the Endowment, Lina Delgado, Executive Director of the Colombian American Association and Deputy Director of House, Linda Calvet, Board Secretary, and Laura Dominguez, Program Officer. And to all of you who are participating in this event virtually. Mr. President, may I present this award to you? Oh, I was going to come up there, but never mind.
Well, we do it upstairs. Thank you so much. Esto va a estar conmigo en mi oficina. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to, first of all, express my gratitude to Ambassador Michael Skoll, and I want to express my gratitude to Carlos Iván López, to Lina Delgado, to Stephanie Younger, to Ali Cordero, Ana Blanco, to Stuart Fleischman, to Rafael Barrios. Express my gratitude to be here joined by Ambassador Fernandez de Soto, our Vice President, Marta Lucía Ramírez, my Chief of Staff, Maria Paula Correa, Juan Francisco Espinosa, Felipe Huitrago, Susana, Hassan. And I am really emotional about receiving this great prize, because this prize deserves to be held by all the Colombian people. It is the generosity of our people and the bonds that we have been building over so many years what has made this policy possible. And I should say that this happens in a year when many things are being celebrated, Guillermo. In 2021, we are celebrating 200 years of the first constitution of Colombia, and it was the constitution of the Great Colombia. It was the binational constitution signed in Cúcuta, and it had something beautiful in the preface of that constitution. La Gran Colombia nace irrevocablemente libre y nunca le pertenecerá a ninguna persona o familia. That is the preface of the 1821 Cúcuta Constitution. And the reason why we fight with diplomatic means and with all our efforts any form of dictatorship is to honor that principle that became the essence of building up a democracy. None of our countries will be owned by a person or a family. And that means no dictator can try to own our nations. We're also celebrating 200 years of a bond that, even though at the end of maybe 1830, put an end to the Gran Colombia dream, the idea of a binational bonding never came to an end. We developed a trading system. We developed a logistical system. We developed an industrial common base. And we developed a lasting set of policies that could allow our countries to exchange goods and services. And that bond that was created was the same bond that during the 20th century, in moments of distress, allowed millions of Colombians to cross the border to Venezuela, and they were received with open arms. And I know that those stories are not theoretical. They happened. And I had my own experience in my family. My grandmother's brother went to Venezuela in 1957. And he created a life project. He lived in Venezuela until the year 2003. Came back to Colombia, years later passed away. And we all remember when Tío Toño came home and he told us the story of how he went to Venezuela and how he faced the opportunities that allowed him to create and materialize his dreams. I remember visiting him in Caracas, driving with him in his car to San Mateo, to the zoo, one of the most beautiful zoos in Latin America. And I remember when he drove me around the neighborhoods where there were Colombian communities. Those were the years of the Venezuelan economic boom. Those were the years of the biggest investments in infrastructure. Those were the days where hundreds of Colombian companies wanted to establish their operations in Venezuela in order to reach that great market. And it was that idea that helped me understand that the dream of Bolívar was a very strong conviction, because we share geography, but we also share destiny. We also share the values that should always be present. And it is with those kind of arguments that many years ago, while I was working at the IDB and later on as a senator, made me publicly propose that the only way to deal with the tragedy of millions of Venezuelans brothers and sisters that were leaving the country in despair, with frozen bones and lacking the access to many services, should be received in Colombia with the same humanitarian sentiment, or even much better, raising the standard into a new cycle of migration management. I run for the presidency, defending the possibility of a temporary protection status. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And I said publicly that it would be a tragedy to see millions of people getting into a country and turning themselves into invisible persons, without access to financial services, to buying a house, to receiving a fair job. And I also said that that kind of policy can also put an end to manipulations that sometimes happen to migrants, either because somebody starts putting pressure on them with the idea of having a citizenship and then return the favor with a political intervention or choosing sides, or simply they will get in hired for a job and will be paid below what a Colombian worker gets paid, because it represents a better opportunity for the one who's hiring and not for the person who's hired. So we made that promise. And since day one in my presidency, this became an objective. And I came here to UNGA 3 years ago. We came here with a good friend, Carlos Holmes Trujillo. And I remember that Secretary Guterres opened for us a side event. And in that side event, and I was accompanied by former Vice President Pence, and I said that the roadmap to attend the crisis required to have a TPS where many countries in the region could take the same road. But it didn't happen. We were some sort of a solitary voice. We launched the public policy. We called the IDB, the World Bank, to have the resources, the funding of many of these initiatives. And I went in 2019 to the OAS General Assembly and said the same thing. And I said that it was a moral duty to embrace the TPS. And we started building it inside the administration. Then in 2020, the pandemic came and affected us badly, but it also affected many of those families that were invisible or that have had a temporary, short-term status, and to other many Venezuelan families that in informality lost all access to forms of income. When we launched Ingreso Solidario in Colombia, we decided also to provide resources to the poorest of the poor that included in parts of the country the migration community, the migrant community. And it was at the beginning of 2021, the same year where we celebrate 200 years of the Cucuta Constitution, that we made the boldest move ever in migration policy in America, in Latin America, or maybe in this hemisphere. And we said clearly, without any hesitation, that this was going to be a 10-year process to grant the temporary status for 10 years so that the families will have the opportunities in Colombia, and that we were going to start a registration project that included biometrical recognition. Filippo Grandi was with us in Bogota. Antonio Vitorino was also following us from Geneva. Many bilateral agencies were there with us, and they thought this was going to be very optimistic to grant cards to 1.8 million citizens. As of today, while I'm talking here to you, we can say that 1.3 million out of the 1.8 have already registered, and they already have biometrical recognition. And they will have their TPS card by the end of this year. And it's not just giving a card, it's having the ID that would allow them to open a bank account, to buy a house, to look for a job, to be part of the subsidized system in healthcare or to the contributive system in healthcare. And we'll have also the possibility to access to other services and be treated as Article 100 of our Constitution says, and is that foreigners in Colombian soil will have the same rights as Colombian citizens. Now, I must say something else. This gesture is our compromise as a nation, as a government, and also for me as a person. But let's be honest. We just can't stand to apply a TPS and do what's good for migration management without finger pointing every day what should happen in order to put an end to this massive migration. The dictatorship in Venezuela must come to an end. The brutal dictatorship in Venezuela must come to an end. People have asked me this week whether I'm optimistic or not about what's taking place in Mexico between the interim government or the democratic resistance and the narco dictatorship. And I have said, somebody could think that that gives reasons to be optimistic. But let's be clear that we can't be naive. We have to understand that Maduro wants to play the same old game that he has done in many opportunities, and that implies that he might convince a sector of the democratic resistance to participate in local elections. And what he will do is that he will allow them to win 1, 2, or 3, or 4 governorships or mayorships. And then he'll say that he is a true Democrat, that he has allowed the opposition to gain some political representation. We know that story. We know that movie. We've seen it many times. What he's going to do next is that he's going to do everything in his means to stay in power longer. And even if the opposition holds 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 governor posts, the tragedy is going to continue. And he will continue to brutalize the opposition, and he will continue to destroy independent, power-free press, and obviously private initiative. So with all due respect, because I have respect for those with bravery are trying to approach that negotiation to trying to find a solution, with all due respect with them, I have to say here also without any hesitation that the only viable outcome of that conversation table in Mexico for the goodwill of the Venezuelan people is that promptly presidential elections are called to take place, guaranteeing with a very rigorous international scrutiny that the Venezuelan people are going to elect who must govern the country, and not to allow the dictatorship to keep on manipulating the system. Any outcome that perpetuates the interest of the dictator is going to be a tragedy. And I'm not going to have ever a diplomatic position to legitimize a dictatorship. I'm a true believer in the democratic charter of the Americas. I am a true believer in the values that we have embraced. I'm a true believer on what was written in the Cúcuta Constitution. The Colombia, the Gran Colombia, now Venezuela and Colombia will never be owned by a person or a family. And this must be the reason why we will always keep our voice loud enough, even though it might be solitary sometimes. But you can never feel solitary when you're defending what you truly believe. The dictatorship must come to an end by calling free presidential elections as soon as possible. And we will support that effort every single moment. And I must say as well that sometimes I get a lot of pressure from some sides of the political spectrum saying, well, the interim government did not knock Maduro down. So why don't you approach a new relationship with the dictatorship? I denounced Nicolas Maduro when I was a senator before the International Criminal Court, with the support of 78 members of the Colombian Senate and 55 members of the Chilean Parliament. And when I became president, I called all the heads of state to do exactly the same, to denounce Nicolas Maduro before the International Criminal Court. You cannot negotiate, you cannot have a true relationship based on trust with someone who is a war criminal. and who has committed the worst crimes in Latin America's recent history. This is not being stubborn, no. This is being loyal to the values that we believe in and to the values that are in every single phrase of the Latin American Democratic Charter. When is this going to come to an end? We might not know the date yet, but that day will come. And we will continue as president, and if needed, as a former president, to devote all my energies and support to the Venezuelan people until liberty is recovered. The prize that I have received today, I receive it with humbleness and as a great honor. And I will have it close to my desk so that it keeps me reminding that the cause that we have embraced is the cause that puts us in the right side of history. This American Venezuelan Association has worked for many, many years. This association has allowed many Venezuelan entrepreneurs and American entrepreneurs to create a strong bonding. Today, we also have the representatives of the Colombian American Association that here in New York has worked for many, many decades. And we must all work not only to raise the voice, but to highlight before all the United States authorities that the only solution to Venezuela is no more Maduro, and to build a new momentum for democracy. I also have to close this line saying the following. When dictators feel comfortable, the only thing that happens to a country is disaster. For the last 3 years, we've put in all the diplomatic pressure needed. Maybe we'll need more. But we have also demonstrated that the diplomatic blockade can take place. And it is because of the diplomatic blockade that he has tried to call for meetings in Mexico. Now we cannot loosen the guard. We have to strengthen the pressure. And the pressure has to be exercised by Venezuelan citizens here in the United States and in everywhere in the world needed, so that the whole international community puts the right pressure so that the presidential elections can happen as soon as possible. Thank you so much for granting me or giving me and honoring me with this prize. And as I said since the beginning, this prize is owned by the Colombian people. Thank you so much.
Okay, no speeches from me. That, Mr. President, these are words to live by, and I hope we'll be able to distribute a recording of what you have said, so that more people can know what's going on, more people can appreciate what you and the Colombian people are doing, and more people can do more to get rid of what's his name across the border. I'd like to thank everyone that I thanked at the beginning. You know who you are. Thank you very much all. Bye-bye.